Hello, my name's Kelvin Dixon. I'm a recent graduate from the University of York, and I'm a researcher looking into new approaches to the evolution of human language and culture. And that's what I'd like to touch about today. I'm going to start off with a video that I originally screened at the Unraveling the Paleolithic conference, and then I'm going to build on and dig deeper into some of those ideas. And I hope it'll be really interesting. I hope you have a good time, and thank you for tuning in. Let's get on. It's generally accepted that human culture is cumulative, with current theories describing how humans uniquely accumulate improvements over time. Through high-fidelity information transfer, individual innovation improvements ratchet cultures into greater levels of complexity, surpassing any set of inventions a single individual could make in a lifetime. While these theories seem to explain technological advancement, they've also sparked debate and can be heavily criticised. At best, they represent a form of linear technological essentialism. After all, improvements and innovations aren't universally accepted or applied by human cultures. Take for instance the revival of vinyl records. Instead, ideas and technologies are often partially adopted, changed, or just outright rejected. For example, Middle Stone Age technologies appear far more syncretic than linear. At worst, cumulative cultural theories echo colonial ideals, assuming technologies and cultural changes inevitably drive progress, and mirroring problematic concepts like manifest destiny. By defining culture through improvements and innovation, we miss deep nuance in how humans actually engage with culture. To muddy the waters further, many species have been shown to have cumulative cultures. From chimps to birdsong, it would seem that cultural accumulation is far more widespread than previously expected. But if this is the case, why is human culture so vibrant and culturally and symbolically rich? The hunt for the evolution of symbolism through the archaeological record has caused so much debate, leading many to reject the idea completely. But this still leaves us with the problem that cumulative cultural theories are overtly technocentric and inadequate to explain how human culture is so different from the rest of the animal kingdom. In some way, human culture does seem to accumulate and change over time. I'm going to approach these questions using semiotics and quantum physics. To do that, I'll need to outline several arguments, and I ask you all to hold any tensions you may have while I draw these points together. In its simplest form, semiotics is the study of signs and meaning. A sign is anything that means something to something. Here I'll use the theories of Charles Peirce. Peirce sought to describe something he called semiosis, or the process through which meaning is infinitely created through the interpretation of signs. For Peirce, semiosis occurs in both humans and animals, and it's always embodied. Peirce's system does not include a symbolic threshold separating the abilities of animals from those of cognitively advanced humans, as we see with Terence Deacon. Instead, Peirce's most clearly defined model contains 9 categories of signs. While called categories, it's a mistake to consider them individually or to imagine that signs can be neatly organised into each. Instead, we should think of them more like interconnected plot points in the constant flow of semiosis, or this continual interpretation of meaning. Semiosis occurs rapidly and constantly. The process continually moves through tiers towards interpretation, inference, and meaning. However, it always begins again as part of this infinite flow. Thousands of words have been written about each of these categories, but for brevity I'll focus on 2. Peirce described symbols as a general rule to which the organism has been subjected. He goes to great lengths to explain that symbols are any sign given meaning by arbitrary convention or habit. The word habit is hugely significant here, as it includes all learning and experiences, both of which are universal to the animal kingdom. Even bacteria and plants exhibit an ability to learn. Ultimately, the concept of a symbol is not a human-specific trait, but a category of sign given its meaning through previous semiotic interpretation. In this way, symbols are always related to earlier inferences. They are active, embodied, and ubiquitous to life on Earth as part of the constant process of semiosis, or the constant process of interpreting meaning and learning. The second category of sign I'd like to highlight is called the Ditchy sign. Ditchy signs are propositions. They're the part of semiosis where an organism makes a propositional interpretation. Peirce recognises these are not exclusive to humans, but encompass human and animal cognition, physiologies, and communication. The act of living, learning, and building knowledge is the act of engaging with the world by making propositions and using these to interpret phenomenon. Those interpretations which are reliable and repeatable become symbols. For Peirce, meaning is an infinite series. Semiosis, or the process of interpreting meaning and knowing the world, never really ends. The categories of signs are dynamic and occur collaboratively, encompassing time, space, physiologies, and an organism's learnt knowledge, which itself is formed and learnt via early semiosis. But because semiosis includes propositions which are proven to be reliable or not, this knowledge is always challenged and relearnt through the ongoing process of semiosis. Essentially, semiosis is a way of modelling reality. However, that model is always being remodelled through interpretation and reinterpretation. Signs never exist alone. They're always interpreted in the context of other signs in which they appear. So semiosis and meaning arise from these complex mixtures of subjective experience, sensory motor functioning, and bodily signals like hunger, which are all entangled with emotional, psychological, and physical states of the animal. In this way, meaning is embodied in the entirety of biological forms. Cognition is just one part of semiosis, but the mind and body are not separate. Some researchers have suggested that semiosis is the process through which organisms have behavioural plasticity and agency in the universe, a semiotic agency. Epigenetics and behavioural subjectivity are both challenging our earlier ideas about genetic inheritance. But long before those, Peirce was attempting to show how semiotic agency allowed organisms to act with behavioural plasticity in infinitely complex worlds. Generational and activational plasticity are both affected by individual agency. The actions of each individual affect epigenetic and phenotypic changes over generations. Through semiotic agency, millions of decisions are made generation by generation in the face of environmental changes and pressures. This ultimately leads to an organism's modern phenotypic physiology. Semiosis provides the agential element in evolutionary change. I argue that reality is experienced differently by every organism. After all, an interpretation of reality is just an interpretation. Even if two people were to look at the same tree, they would not perceive the same tree. Microscopic differences in their eyes, their heights, or their individual knowledge about trees may affect each person's understanding, and their emotional and physical states may affect that even further. Even if they were genetic twins, they could not occupy the same physical space and time. Ultimately, the ways animals interpret their worlds shapes their bodies and behaviours. But reality is not passive, and the physical universe itself is part of the semiotic dialogue. To understand that there's no one way to experience reality, we must challenge the presumption that reality is something stable, existing outside the individual organism. Reality is dynamic, including fluid and changing environmental and physical forces. In Karen Barrad's theory of agential realism, reality is not fixed, but instead it constantly emerges through the inseparable, entangled agency of all matter. Phenomena and objects come into being through interactions of mutually constitutive matter. In this way, both living and inanimate matter have agency. Through the entangled interactions of material forces, reality constantly emerges. I argue that Barrad's physics, this agential realism, works neatly with the semiotic agency of Peirce. Biological life is just one way matter manifests in the universe, and through semiosis, life behaviourally and physically changes as part of all entangled material phenomenon. Our bodies exist as part and parcel of the material universe. The materiality of our bodies changes with our actions, which of course are led by semiotic agencies of interpretation. But these changes are entangled in a fundamentally interconnected reality. When we lift weight, our bones get denser to offset the agential power of gravity and mass. In a universe of entangled matter, life is both shaped by those other agencies and in turn shapes them. Biological life and material reality are entangled in a continual emergence. They are mutually becoming. Let's stop the video there and take a moment to think about some of the major points here, because I'm making some big arguments and I think it's important to deeply understand the implications of those. So sometimes to do that, I need to start again in how I describe it, but this time from a tiny molecular standpoint, right? So reality, all reality that we experience is the entanglement of all matter and physical phenomenon in the universe, right? And this is always interactive, all interactively entangled, so affecting each other, right? And, for Barad, there's not really borders between objects and beings or objects and things. Instead, reality is constantly emerging. It's mutually becoming. And becoming is this really important word because it shows how all matter, animate or inanimate, has agency, right? So agency is no longer this thing that's unique to life, right? And let's think about that. The mass of the earth holds us to gravity. Ice and water shape the world that we navigate as organisms. And if we think about the interactivity of it all, the mass and the rotation of the moon connected to the mass of the earth bring the tides in and out, right? And if you're an animal living in those tidal regions, you're affected by all these other things that they have agency on the way you be, the way you act, the way you are, right? Now, life is one form of matter in the universe, and life is also interactively entangled. The things organisms do are also part of the emergence of reality, right? And this is where the idea of niche construction comes in. And to survive in these complex and changing environments of interactive physical phenomenon, life has to be able to act through genetic and behavioural plasticity. So, many physicists, many mathematicians, think of Gödel or Turing, they suggest that knowing everything is impossible. Reality is so vast it's fundamentally unknowable, except in small ways and for short periods of time. And this is where I suggest Barad and Peirce can be woven together. Through interpretational semiosis, this is this Peircean semiosis, life models reality and makes choices, which Barad calls the Agential cuts. Remember, semiosis is fully embodied, fundamentally and fully embodied, with interpretation and semiosis occurring across all biology, even down to the replication of DNA. So semiosis, or the act of interpreting the world and drawing meaning from it, allows animals to model reality through their material bodies, which themselves are part of the emergent, entangled material reality, right? And, when we think about this from a biology point of view, the modelling of reality occurs through, our phenotypic physiology, sensory motor functioning, individual experience, emotional states, our endocrine system, hormones, learning, cognition, temporal, spatial context, our health, the agency and interpretations of our conspecifics and our relational dynamics with them, right? All at once. And these models and interpretations are realised through the way we learn, the way we grow, the actions we take, and it's an infinite ongoing process, right? Semiosis is occurring constantly, right? It's what Peirce describes as an infinite series, with interpretations always occurring through previous interpretations, right? In a reality where all matter has agency, semiosis or semiotic agency is the way life practices that agentiality. Okay, let's stop there and look at some evidence, because those are some pretty big claims. And what evidence do we have that life is interpretational? Biosemioticians have been kind of arguing this for about 20 years now. But do we have any evidence to say that life is semiotic and based on interpretation? And I think a key concept here is world modelling, or how animals understand their worlds, make decisions, learn. And animal decision making has been at the heart of, biology, ecology, cognition for, since the birth of those fields, right? And what we previously thought was that genetic dispositions, right, or innate behaviours drove many animal decisions. For instance, fruit flies, Drosophila, were thought to innately move towards light, right? And they were a classic laboratory animal. But in modern studies, under modern scrutiny, we're finding that the parameters of earlier experiments actually removed diversity and affected the behaviours we saw. So when fruit flies are constrained from flight through injury or through space, they will not move towards light. So there's an element of decision making and interpretation there, right? On top of this, like when you look at learning and the application of learning, which are really basal, biological processes, and they're found in plants, they're found in bacteria, right? Like when learning and how learning is applied are looked at and considered, we also see interpretation. So let me give you an example of this. rats, like humans, have an adolescence, and in that adolescence they have their first playful mating or sexual encounters, right? Now you'd think that mating, the need to procreate, is a very basal drive, and you'd think that's very hardwired, innate. But what we're finding is it's actually learned. It's actually partially learned through experience, through the modelling of the world as the animal lives. So in these rats that are having their first, playful mating experiences, if we introduce strong scents like lemon or orange, they will then preferentially select those in the future, right? But again, that's preferential. Not always. There's an element of interpretation and decision making there. On top of that, the application of learning is affected by stress, perception of danger, hunger, right? All these different bodily states. So it's all interpretational. Do you see what I mean? Even things you think are very basal ideas like mating are not as simple as that. Then we're seeing personalities, right? We've started to see personalities in animals, even among genetically identical individuals, which we're seeing in cockroaches recently. Personalities have also been seen in pigs and birds. And I would suggest that what these personalities are interpretation differences based on experience, right? Or individual subjectivity, right? Now, let's move away from the macro and look at the very micro, right? Bodily states here. So if we move away from information, which is what we typically use in biology, and we talk about interpretation, information kind of suggests accuracy. Interpretation suggests fallibility. And actually, fallibility is at the heart of all biological processes, down to the very basic ones, right? Every time a cell splits, there is a transcription error. 3,000 transcription errors, in fact, 3,000 mutations. And most of those are cleared up and removed, right? Now, mutagenesis, or that act of transcription failure, is a foundational biological phenomenon, right? A big part of evolution. And in fact, bacteria make more transcription errors, right? They're more fallible under stress. And bodily modelling also occurs. So, when I lift weights, being close to failure or actually at failure changes my body, right? I build bigger muscles because of being very close to failure or at failure. As agency is distributed between animate and inanimate phenomenon, reality can never be fully known. For Barrard, reality kicks back against our interpretations, and for Peirce, fallibility is fundamentally part of propositional and inferential semiosis. In a universe of entangled agential forces, semiosis allows animals to model shortcuts towards predictable phenomena through the accumulation of knowledge. In this sense, embodied knowledge describes everything from a reliable connection between a predator and a sound to a sense of balance. Reliable interpretations become heuristic. However, before knowledge has been acquired, it's possible to act on embodied belief. In semiosis's infinite flow, there's this tension between belief, heuristic knowledge, and dynamic reality. As ditchy signs and propositions are proven to be reliable or not by reality, knowledge can be challenged and new beliefs can be formed. For example, our bodies complete semiotically modelled interpretations all the time. These are well known to us, heuristically handled, reliable, repeatable, and sometimes subconscious. But when something unexpected occurs, our interpretation of these can shift from knowledge to belief, and we become aware of our fallibility once again. In doing so, remodelling continues. Okay, let's stop and dig a bit deeper here again. So, interpretations allow organisms to model their worlds and act on belief and knowledge. And I want to really highlight both belief and knowledge here because I think there is a difference. And I think that semiotic agency requires both. Now, for a really good discussion of the importance of belief in human evolution, I recommend a book by Agustin Fuentes, 2019, I think. But he does miss the importance of knowledge. And I think it's important to highlight a difference. So let's look at my definitions again. Let's look at my definitions. So the reality is the accumulation of all entangled matter, and that comes from Barrard and Peirce. Belief is a semiotically modelled conception or interpretation of sign meanings that presupposes its own fallibility. I may be wrong. Right? Knowledge is a semiotically modelled conception of sign meanings presupposing its own fact or its own accuracy. So it's often reliable, repeatable, or heuristic, but it's always fallible. Let's talk about knowledge first in this. So wherever interpretations are found to be reliable, these become heuristic knowledge through a process called hypostatic abstraction. For Peirce, the way possibility or propositions become reliable relationships or interpretations is this process of hypostatic abstraction, which Peirce took from maths, right? So the experience that honey is sweet becomes the knowledge that honey has sweetness, right? We no longer need to try honey to know that. And incidentally, this is also an agential cut, as described by Barrard. So again, the two theories complement each other really well. So through hypostatic abstraction, life models reality into these heuristic, habitual and learnt knowledge. And so the propositional ditchy signs of Peirce become Peircean arguments. Now, interpretation and knowing are always embodied, and they're not cognitive or mental as our language suggests. And even now when I talk about the word, like the idea of knowing, the word knowing makes me, I can almost feel it in my brain, right? It's not something purely of the mind, and we can totally know with our whole body, right? Let's think of some examples of that. So there are many body processes taking place through heuristic habitual signs. Think of your heartbeat or your sense of hunger. But also, you can know things with your whole body that you've learned. I can walk up to a door that I use to access work every day, and I can enter a passcode without ever actively thinking about it. I mean, I am heuristically thinking about it, but never actively thinking about it. Driving, I can drive across town and suddenly got there and thought, oh, how did I did it, I know I did it, but I don't remember it. I was not really, it wasn't a conscious activity. So knowledge can happen largely unconsciously, right? But we can also both believe and know with our bodies. For example, we've spoken about belief just now, but life also acts on belief, or this presupposition that, it can be wrong. For a classic example, think of an animal leaving its den or its nest or its set, right? And it wants to smell the air and decide if it's safe or not. And there's a tentativeness to all those decisions. So let's go back and remember all semiotic agency is embodied. For example, when we walk, a step has stability through elements of hypostatically abstracted knowledge, a series of heuristic habitual signs like the learnt behaviour of walking, the development of balance and proprioception needed to do that, the growth and maintenance of bone and muscle, right? Signals from the brain and muscles. But also, parts of that step occur through new propositions and beliefs, especially if something novel is occurring. If the ground is uneven or it challenges our balance, for example. If that occurs, we move away from knowledge and reliable interpretations, and we have to make new propositions. We go back into belief. So sometimes walking is conscious, but sometimes it occurs heuristically. Think about noticing a friend across the room. You might walk straight towards them. Hey, Dave, how's it going? You might do that with little thought on actually the act of walking. But if that room included stepping stones or unbalanced floors, you'd have to take a more active role in navigating it, which brings us back to the fact that semiosis is always ongoing, right? And with constant interpretations being made through both heuristic habitual knowledge and propositional belief over novel occurrences. So this allows life to exist with plasticity in these intricately complex and changing worlds, this universe, right? And remember, fallibility is at the very heart of this theory. So even reliable knowledge can be wrong. Given enough time and variables, the universe can kick back, as Barrard says, proving our interpretations to be inaccurate. So we can begin to see a vision of evolution as an agential dialogue between the material universe and life as material bodies. Remember, life is a form of matter. Our bodies are material, and all matter, animate or inanimate, has agency. We're phenomena in the entangled reality of all interactive phenomena. So embodied semiotic agency and world modelling is infinitely ongoing. And semiosis is a process of becoming, an infinite embodied dialogue with the universe in which life and reality continuously and interactively emerge. Now, an interesting implication of this is, epigenetic and genetic change are ways to pass bodily knowledge between generations. Epigenetic changes occur in relation to individual experience, action, and action, which themselves take place through semiotic agency. Now, genetic inheritance means the next generation already have many of the agential cuts or the bodily knowledge necessary for them to live within their immediate temporal spatial reality. So through generations and generations of decisions, interpretations and actions, amid the entangled agency of reality, so remember, reality is working on you, selecting, right? Life changes when phenotypes arise, and from this great chain of semiosis and happenstance. And if we think about the extended evolutionary synthesis here, we can begin to see how many aspects of current evolutionary theory fit this idea that I'm attempting to define here. Natural and group selection, the Baldwin effect, reciprocal causation, etc. We've seen how animals model reality through a dynamic set of constructed, enacted, and changing interpretations. Embodied, immediate, contextual, and built on experience, but always in the process of being learnt and remodelled. Rather than brains and signs being referential, they're inferential and interpretational, allowing organisms to have agency and make choices as part of complex environments of agential phenomena. However, no organism exists alone. Reality always includes the semiotic agencies of other organisms as part of the entangled material universe. Biospheres are entanglements of such agencies, like predator-prey relationships, group dynamics, symbiosis, and shared habitats. In turn, such understandings of reality are always relational, simultaneously modelled through individual experience and at a group level. I posit physiologies of conspecific communication have convergently emerged billions of times due to how meaning is always partially co-created within a group. Human language is just one actualization of this multimodal flow of meaning. All animal languages evolve from this common need to interpret reality, simultaneously as individuals and groups. However, modern human language emerged as a multimodal toolbox of physiologies and behaviours, entangled with strong emotional bonds, allowing the collaborative and communal negotiation of reality. What we've previously called cumulative cultures are the observable spaces where animals renegotiate and share reliable knowledge, meanings, and interpretations among social groups and across generations. Culture is therefore fluid, existing in a distributed form among the semiosis of individuals, groups, and the agency of matter as inseparable phenomena. In this way, culture can flow like tides, changing minute perspectives, shifting discourses, and new physical realities. Yet with subtle differences among diverse individuals as intersectional entities, yet communally connected to one another. I've demonstrated how life is not referential. Cognition, language, it's not referential. But instead, all language, all biology is inferential and interpretational. We've also seen how genetic and epigenetic inheritance allows life to pass knowledge between generations. I suggest that culture and language are other parts of this picture, right? Together providing a major way life shares and negotiates interpretations or beliefs and knowledge. So, you have genetics and epigenetics, and you have culture and language, and together they form an interactive way for organisms to model their worlds and react with individual, group, and generational plasticity. Now, science has tended to focus on the individual, think of genetic inheritance, think of the scientific focus on the subject, but a repercussion of broad agential reality is the removal of simple binaries like individual and group. Remember, all the universe is entangled and interactive, right? You can't really separate it easily. Because the universe is entangled, all semiosis, or, the act of interpreting and making meaning, will always include the fallible semiosis of others. The meaning I take from the world includes you and your actions, right? Which those are themselves dictated by your own semiosis, which in turn may affect me and my actions, right? Or be affected by me and my actions. So we have to begin to question the idea of the individual as a raw unit of reality. In fact, even as I talk to you today, my body's made up of communities, right? There's microbiomes of microscopic organisms that are uniquely part of me, and I'm uniquely part of them. While sounding hypocritical, a true individual can never really exist. Yet individual actualization and semiosis are essential. They're constitutive parts of the group and reality, because together their experiences and actions affect the way life becomes. This great becoming emergence of reality, right, is absolutely dependent on diversity and intersectionality. They're huge drivers in conspecific evolution. Now, in this way, the individual and the group they're intricately interwoven and completely independent. They can't be separated. And incidentally, I suspect this might be the source of consciousness. There's no I without you, and that's a different argument, right? Anyway, life has existed socially since it first appeared on Earth, right? And so rather than sociality being an unusual trait, it's actually one of the most common traits. In fact, the earliest fossils 3.4 million years ago are these communities, these bacterial mats of cyanobacteria. So with these ideas in mind, we begin to see how the dialogical performance of semiosis, like making meaning between conspecifics, so within groups, has led species to develop adaptations to intrapersonal reality modelling and meaning making. Because understanding and acting in reality will always involve an element of sociality, always involve an element of other individuals. And in other words, this is a problem of language. So I argue that language convergently emerged many times and is seen in the array of physiologies which help to tackle this problem of shared interpersonal meaning making and semiosis. In this way, we can begin to think of language more like reproduction or locomotion, right? It emerges in a multitude of varieties via life's continued negotiation of the same problem. And in this case, that problem is, all these individuals are attempting to understand reality, and because there are other individuals in reality around them, reality is always social. So how do we negotiate that? And so to understand how language emerges, let's look at whales as a quick example. So throughout the recent evolution of whales, the last, I think, 50 million years, they've made semiotically agential decisions to invest in the water, to take more time in the water, to survive and live in the water more. And across generations, when faced with the agential power of the ocean back against them as well, whales have become bound to the sea. They've lost their legs. They've evolved flippers. But at the same time, we can see how whales must have made agential decisions to continue conspecific communication, because we have whale song. So the language of whales, their song, it emerged through this continued desire to communicate, to conspecifically negotiate reality in the face of near complete darkness, great distances, and the peculiar physics of water which make sound bend. So what we can begin to see is how different languages are socially emergent, right? And building on the foundations I've outlined here, this is how I define language. Of course, I therefore define language, it's not something that's unique to humans. And many aspects of language once thought to be unique have been found, in other species. And I'm happy to talk about that, but I don't quite have the time right now. Feel free to ask questions. Of course, we can't really separate language from culture. The two are interactively entwined, and that's a fact that's often missed when we look at theories that attempt to describe either language or culture individually. And here's an example, right? Both these sentences are the same, their grammatical meanings are the same, but they have completely different actual, real world meanings. Because language is a method of negotiating culture. But in turn, language is itself affected by cultures. Then these two things are entangled, right? So I posit we can also define culture as something common to life on Earth. Cultures are therefore the observable spaces where organisms renegotiate and share known meanings and beliefs or inferences among social groups and generations. For example, bighorn sheep, they transmit migration routes across generations, making use of the best learnt feeding spots. This is culture, right? And of course, these migration routes change and are renegotiated depending on predation threats, novel occurrences, changing environments. So I therefore define culture thus. Culture is, culture basically is frameworks of knowledge and belief, which are semiotically modelled and negotiated, but renegotiated among conspecifics and across generations. It's never as simple as a straight line transmission because of differences in individuals, like interpretation, physiology, experience, emotion. And the communicative element of this can be described as languages, including all the ways to express and comprehend meaning underpinned by these physiologies of social groups and biologies of meaning making. Think of your voice box, think of the jaw of the howler monkey. The hereditary behavioural patterns, which change and are renegotiated but pass between groups and group members and generations, can be described as culture. So together, language and culture are ways to individually, socially and cross-generationally negotiate reality with a degree of immediate or rapid plasticity. Among hominin species, growing emotional, social and physiological connections alongside changing physiologies of meaning-making co-evolved in ways that selected for a communally negotiated comprehension of meaning. Longer childhoods, alloparenting, endocrine-driven emotional connections, better control of vocalization, etc. These co-evolved in the face of changing environments and survival pressures. As these abilities emerged, semiotic modelling of reality became increasingly collaborative and negotiated. The fallible things hominin believed and knew about their worlds expanded, passing down increasingly complex models of reality to be negotiated from generation to generation. This created dynamic scaffoldings of meaning, beliefs and knowledge in which humans could negotiate and interpret their worlds, a metaphorical and metaphysical repository, intentionally and unintentionally taught across groups and generations, yet also individually and communally renegotiated in the face of physiological differences, changing habitats, etc. In this way, culture is not necessarily cumulative. It's not a cumulative collection of information or innovations. Instead, meanings and fallible interpretations are laid down over generations in a way we can describe as sedimentary. And like sediment, the layers can be unearthed, washed away, dug into, and new foundations can be built. Or we can be born on those sediments and be totally unaware of the layers below our feet. Again, time to dig a bit deeper here, because if language and culture are common world modelling practices among species, what are humans doing differently and why? Because clearly language and culture is, like, the human actualization of those is quite unique, right? It is different. How does human-specific language and culture arise? Well, now that we've kind of understood what language and culture are, we can kind of look at what is different about human language and culture. And that potentially comes in the fact that it is very collaborative. It's highly communal. It's highly emotionally connected, empathetic, and sedimentary, which I'll come to a little later. So I argue that what humans have is this highly developed, communal, collaborative kind of world modelling, or this advanced ability to communally co-create reality, right? And it's difficult to understand because I've essentially said that all animals are doing something very similar. But I think the way for me to help you understand what I'm trying to say here, and I don't like this phrasing, but it's just a good way for me to help explain it. Humans invest in each other. Now, to kind of get to the bottom of what I'm trying to say there, I think we need to look at modern language and culture and have a look at what is this multimodal toolbox of biologies, physiologies, cognitive abilities and behaviours, or maybe select a few, and it'll help us to understand. And I think at the heart of this is deeply felt endocrine-driven emotional connections. You know, like Penny Spikins kind of said it a while ago, that emotions drive humanity. And I think this is strongly seen, right? If we take a human and we isolate them, they become immunocompromised, right? Life expectancy shrinks. They have a whole wealth of health issues. My own well-being is connected to my perception of the well-being of the group, right? As a human, we're really interlocked emotionally and endocrine, hormonally, right? On top of that, we have this incredible ability to express ourselves. And then also this incredibly strong empathy, or the ability to understand the emotions and intentions, or, you know, the expressions of others, right? And this is all underpinned by biologies, you know, this human-specific brain physiology, you know, our control of breath and vocalizations, as well as our ability to gesticulate and use our hands, you know, possibly made possible by pediality. Alloparenting, we rely on each other and our parents so much. Assisted birth, again, maybe a byproduct of bipedality. Face-to-face, pleasure-driven sex, right? And these long childhoods, which allow us to learn these complex frameworks of belief and knowledge. And then finally, and probably most important here for archaeologists, tools are material extensions of material bodies. There's never this moment when they become symbolically important. There's never a moment when they gain social importance. It's implicit from the moment they become an extension of a material body. So the moment they're worn or held or used, right? Now, I think a really good way for me to bring an example here of how humans are so entangled into each other, what we've done is lean into each other. It's the idea of involuntary noises. Now, many animals have involuntary noises. Think of cries of pain, and common amongst mammals is laughter. Now, humans clearly also have laughter, and you've probably felt the involuntariness of it yourself. If you go into a room and someone is absolutely cackling, you can't help but laugh. Sometimes there's a joke that's not even funny, but another person has found it hilarious, and that's enough to make your belly laugh, right? But there's another thing we can do with our laughter. Let's go back to that party. I walk in, I see Dave, and I say, "Hey, Dave, how's it going?" Now, that laugh is not involuntary. I've kind of controlled it, and Dave knows it, I know it, and it becomes part of the way that we smooth these emotions together. We smooth these social interactions, and humans do that with a lot. We're interconnected with, like, tears. When someone else feels emotional, we feel emotional. We're interconnected. When someone else yawns, we yawn. In fact, most of the media we experience is about the joy we feel in sharing another person's emotional experience, right? So ultimately, what we can kind of see is all this biology here results in an organism that's intricately tied together in this communal biological need to understand and be understood and to co-create meaning. Of course, this evolves, through this communal negotiation of reality in the face of changing realities, as we've described earlier. So why and how did this evolve? Well, if we do what we did with whales and we look at what agential choices did hominins need to do again and again, well, hominins needed to care about what each other thought. They needed to care about what each other experienced. They needed to explain themselves or want to explain themselves or express themselves in ways that others could understand. And they needed to understand the emotions and intentions of each other. So maybe they needed to express danger. Maybe they needed to express ideas, right? But whatever it is, over long periods of time, many generations, hominins needed to lean into each other, right? By emotionally and physically relying on each other, hominins could build larger, more intricate frameworks of interpretation, or bigger semiotic scaffoldings of interpreted knowledge and belief, right? You remember these are fallible, right? And these are negotiated and renegotiated across individuals, groups, and generations, right? Intersectionally, these are negotiated across time. And because knowledge and belief begin to settle like sediment, more knowledge is passed between generations. And knowledge, remember, is thought to be factual. It's thought to be reliable, right? And as greater scaffoldings of meaning are passed between generations, you become further and further away from the original interpretation. And ultimately, these things become naturalized. So we might find ourselves trapped in what it means to be a man, what womanhood should look like, if genders even exist, right? We might find ourselves trapped in social structures, or in the expectations of what is good and what is bad. Current consensus suggests Oldowan tools are not cultural, but instead collections of pragmatic decisions. At sites like Swakrans, hominin groups repeatedly visited to exploit predator kills. They used the abundant local material to create efficient but minimally worked stone tools. Such expedient napping is likely to offset the threat of their own predation. At first glance, these decisions are pragmatic, but when we look at the earliest stone tools through the lens of negotiated realities, we see there's no longer a threshold in which objects gain conventional social meaning. That's implicit in all tools as material extensions of hominin material bodies and the bodies of their conspecifics. In this way, there's no period or single archaeological assemblage when culture or symbolism appears. Instead, bodies, behaviours and tools mutually and fallibly become. These phenomena collectively emerge among the moment by moment performances and dialogues of matter and meaning. The pragmatic decisions seen among Old One tools can only be made as part of generationally negotiated cultures of knowledge and belief about napping. Repeated behaviours occurring across generations and within groups through multimodal language. Well, I've kind of run out of room here to talk about the Old One in any greater depth, which I'm really sad about because I get to in my thesis. And if you found this interesting, I fully recommend checking out my thesis. More than anything, I write in much greater clarity than I speak. um, but yeah, I wanted to say thank you for being here and for listening to an incredibly complex topic. Before we go, I kind of wanted to tackle an ethical issue here. It would be wrong of me to kind of ask you to think about every single thing you believe, every single thing you experience as just an interpretation and not help you to, contextualize that somehow. This comes from feminist metaphysics. And remember, the heart of it is the things we believe and the things we do help to create reality. So we're not trapped in these sediments. We can change reality. If you think every single day we eat healthy, we feel a bit better for that. Every single day we share empathy for ourselves and for each other, we make small changes to change the world. And in this way, we have the agency to make the world a better place. We're not completely passive in this. And I want to say that to a room full of scientists because I think we are a big element in the way the world is discursively understood and created. So that's my challenge to you is to go away and think about what you can do to help create that reality you want to see in the future. Thank you very much for your time. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Kelvin. That was absolutely fantastic. A real pleasure to listen to and to watch.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm glad you enjoyed it. uh, it's
Uh,
sometimes it's weird to hear yourself talk for so long.
yeah, I can imagine. Do you want to unshare your screen and then
Mm.
we can get to asking some questions?
How do I unshare? Can edit a video but cannot unshare. Here we go.
There we go, nice. So yeah, if anybody has any questions, we've got kind of 10, 15 minutes. And you feel free to either put your hand up and ask out loud or to type them in the chat box. So I've got one from Walter already, asking how much of what you spoke about is based on experimentation versus observations versus deductions?
Well, what I'm attempting to do personally is look at it paradigmatically, like look at a paradigm shift. And I've tried to, in my actual thesis, um, give hard laboratory evidence to back stuff up wherever possible. That's why I talk about the rats and the, fruit fly, because both of those are classic laboratory experiments. But I think when you're looking at something at this really high level, you're never going to have a single data point to prove it, right? It'd be like saying to Darwin, "I want you to singly prove this one thing." Do you know what I mean? And I'm not compare. Shouldn't compare myself to Darwin. I'm not really. I'm simply saying what we're looking at is this high level way we look at evolution and way we look at the agentiality. So I think the kind of way to think about this going forward is, oh, actually, when I look at my results, when someone else does objective science-based laboratory things, when they're building their methodology, when they're interpreting their results, when they're thinking about what this might actually mean, this is where this can come in because it can help us to reinterpret our results. Um, yeah, I hope that kind of makes sense. So it's more of a way to take the way we understand evolution now and kind of just turn it like 45 degrees and look at it in another angle, which is what I'm attempting to. Yeah.
That sounds great, thanks. We've got a message from Isabel just saying, fascinating. I now have a lot to think about. Thank you.
Oh, thanks, Isabel. That's lovely. Yeah. Thank you all for your questions.
I know you've been thinking about this for a while and it's formed quite it is your master's thesis. What kind of thing got you started thinking about this in the first place?
Oh, well, that's actually, yeah, that's a big question. That's a big question, isn't it? Well, my dad he was a post-colonial lecturer in English literature. So this kind of stuff has always interested me. And he's also been disabled his entire life. So this combination between embodiment, like the embodiment of experiencing life differently abled or disabled, mixed with the experience of like growing up around kind of big theories, it's always really excited me. So the heart of this comes from Roland Barthes, right? And Roland Barthes in the 1950s looks at the French philosopher, French writer. He looks at what it means to be French, and he says, "All right, people have this idea that being French isn't somehow natural, right?" And he starts to question it, and he's like, "Oh, there's all these things in society that are mythologies; they're not really natural." Um, and I don't know why, but it occurred to me very young in life that you can apply that to every single word. So for a long time, I've kind of realized that everything's been negotiated. And then I think another big like powerful paper was the one from I wish I could remember who wrote it. I'm so sorry. What I'll do is on my Instagram I will post the name of who wrote it. But it was one of the first papers we read for our masters, and it was from a leading geneticist in human evolution. And he was talking about how there isn't actually a human genome. What there is a collection of things we have said this represents, or this kind of like is enough to say it's human. So I really like this idea of combining, you know, evolution with this also idea that every single thing that humans believe is in some way negotiated. Um, I don't know if I answered your question there. Just for clarity, everyone, I'm going for an ADHD test at the moment, so I often lose my train of thought and get confused. Um, but yeah, if I didn't quite answer your question there, please let me know, Phoebe. Yeah.
No, no, that was really good. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay.
And we also had a reply in the chat from Walter saying thanks for answering. So I think you did answer questions
Yeah,
well.
no worries, Walter. Thanks for the question. It was a good one. Yeah. Uh,
We've got a hand up from Bayard. Would you like to unmute?
Yep. Hello. Hi.
hey, buddy.
Hi, Kelvin. Um, I mean, by nature of the topic, like this is a really like a nightmare to try and articulate anything that I'm trying to ask here. Um, a lot of what you covered was about the like agentiality and the idea of all matter having that,
Mm, mm,
and then that was um sort of both part of and separate from the idea of how much meaning making and decision making sort of consciously is involved.
mm,
And so like an obvious example of that is you gave the example of like an animal tentatively deciding to come out or not come out in the presence of sort of threats,
mm,
compared to earlier in the video the mention of sort of ice and glaciers forming uh the landscape. So the one that was interesting to me was the whales and song, which I I I I struggled wrapping my head around where that lies in that sort of spectrum,
mm,
and where that line between um beyond just saying something being alive or not alive, the line between agency as impact as a result of responding to things happening versus agency as a decision that's being made,
mm, mm.
if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a spicy conversation all the way through, right? Uh, Ultimately, a big part of this is based on Karen Barad, and what she attempts to do is break down all these binaries. So you no longer have subject object. You no longer have. So in many ways, you could say it's not really a decision, but there is kind of something transcendental there in it. Um, I think that's what you're trying to ask. I think there's something transcendental in it ultimately because what you have is, yeah, you have a collection of molecules that have formed into cells that have decided to hang out together, right, over a long period of time in a certain way that makes me. But that experience allows me to partly co-construct the world together with you. So there is something almost transcendental in it, and it is kind of hard to for me to articulate or really get my head around fully. Does that kind of make sense? Have I quite answered you there, or have I not?
I think so. I have a feeling that it's veering closer to almost like a separate topic, almost. But just that idea of like I say, like the phrasing, and again, this is where I think the sort of linguistic nightmare element of it is.
Yeah,
But like
yeah,
the phrasing of whales having a desire to communicate, and that's what leads to
yes.
whale song, which implies that whales have a different desire than perhaps other fish, and that is some sort. Does that make sense? Like, then I know that
Yeah.
you're not suggesting that's happening at a human grade cognitive level, but
Oh,
at the same time trying to find that line.
well, that's actually okay. There's multiple things I can talk about there. It's really interesting. First off, I think there's an underlying tone in what I'm attempting to do here, which is question a lot of our scientific a lot of the ways science has been done in the past, like assumptions. Um, and one of those is this focus on like utilitarianism. That's a hard word for me to say. Utilitarianism. We often say stuff like legs evolved to walk, right? Wings evolved to fly. And it's this oversimplification. And by saying whales desired to communicate, there is an element of desire there. They wanted to, they needed to in some way. And this is that agency where, let's think about Tiktaalik or these very early amphibians that crawled up onto the beaches and began to and were the first like tiny specks in what would become the beach of us walking. Do you know what I mean? That's lots of mixed metaphors there. Um, but essentially, they're not aiming to build legs. Each individual animal is desiring to maybe escape predation, climb onto land for a little bit, maybe um, actively move across different areas of small wetland, maybe um, just getting washed up on land more and more and more because of where they live. But there's an element where at some point in time they needed and wanted to actively move through ocean and land. Do you see what I mean? So there is an element of luck in it, but there's also an element of continuation and desire. And I don't know if that makes sense. But on an individual level, those amphibians aren't looking to make legs, but their continued decisions to do that, which can desire is a difficult word. And that kind of brings us back to one of those points you said earlier on. We're always constrained in how we can understand these conversations because what we do as humans is we understand the world through this language that is fluid and floppy and difficult, which is why so many scientists find it so hard to pin down and actually study emotions, right? Because I can say love and like love is fluid and applied and used in many different ways. I hope that kind of makes sense. Does that make
Yeah, no,
sense
that's
to anybody?
perfect. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, that was yeah, that answered what I was asking. So yeah, I'm happy with that. Thank you.
Awesome, man. No worries, no worries.
Really fascinating topic overall.
Oh, cool. Yeah. Well, thank you for the lovely question. Yeah, and thank you, Phoebe. Yeah, like.
I think we'll probably leave it there in terms of questions because we've just hit 2 o'clock. But we have got another couple of notes in the chat just saying thanks very much and lovely images and lots of things to think about. Yeah, which I definitely feel too.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for coming. It's been lovely.
Thank you very much for sharing with us and putting so much effort in.